My name is Bill Swan, and I'm an alcoholic. It's always safe to say I've not heard his story. Then they record it, and if you bomb, guess what? It's not the chairperson's fault. He gave himself an exception at the beginning. I would like to dedicate this message to a guy that I used to sponsor in Chicago, Scott Hammerl. He committed suicide in a hotel 2 days ago. Alcoholism left untreated is fatal. Fatal. Uh, I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It saved my life. I'm so grateful that Dolly's here. I always get uncomfortable around people that know me, but I don't know why, because I share where I'm at to begin with. Talking to a good friend of mine who joined here a moment ago last night, kind of spoke some words into me. Because when Glenn asked me to speak, 4 or 5 days later, my mom passed. It would have been a different story had I spoke here then. And I don't know if there's some sadness involved. There's some uncertainty. There's some confusion. But I keep showing up. And I mean, the other night I was asked to speak at a meeting, and I don't know if it just seemed like the weight of the world was on me. I didn't feel as connected to God. I know that He didn't move, and I know that I didn't go anywhere. Sometimes there's just blockage from life. But I stay faithful to the cause, and I was just wondering what my purpose is. For the record, Glenn, I have a sobriety date. It's Easter Sunday, 2022. That would be April 22nd, time for a resurrection. It's not my first attempt at getting sober. In fact, I tried out for AA for about 41 years, sitting in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, not comprehending the first step. Congratulations to Marino on 15 days. Adam, 5 or 6 months. When I first looked at you, Adam, I thought you were the president of AA. So, my perception's still flawed. Thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous. But at 2.5 years sober, coming up on 31 months, my thinking's not the best. And I have to be reminded that what I am is I'm an agent. That's what the book tells me. I'm an agent of this power. I have a new employer. And I love the reading this morning, sought through prayer and meditation. And this morning, we got a 16-year-old kid that comes on my home group's early risers out of Fort Myers. We meet at 6:15, 7 days a week. I'm there most of them. I have a service position there. I go to a lot of in-person meetings as well. I went to one this morning only because I would be speaking here today. And I like to rub shoulders with alcoholics. Sometimes I can lose myself in this two-dimensional platform of sobriety. It certainly serves a purpose. And I like what one of our members was saying, hey, guess what? I can't drive as well at night, or something's going on with my health, and this is a godsend. And it came at a very, very trying time for what was going on in the world or in our country, whether it was a hoax or whether it was real. And what it did is it brought us together. And we're with giants. My sponsor spoke here a few weeks ago. Another good friend of mine from Las Vegas spoke here, and I believe a couple of my friends from California. You got giants in here, and then you get me. You know what I mean? But occasionally, if they get you shaped up enough, Dolly, then when I talk, you won't know the difference. Their spirit will just carry on. I didn't understand the unmanageability. I was thinking about this right before I got on here today. They used to tell me down at the 2250 group in St. Petersburg, they said, you're going to manage your way right back into a drink. And I thought there was something wrong with them. I would get sober because the consequences of my drinking and whatever other substances I put in my body, if I couldn't get my hands on a drink, would drive me back to AA because it's the only way sober. I had to be sober to get off of probation. I had to be sober to get a job back. I had to be sober to get back into the house. And what I did is I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got what I was looking for. I got what I came for. It's interesting when I think of the story about Jim in our book. They give an example about a guy who's institutionalized or hospitalized, as my sponsor likes to call it, hospitalized. I like that word. He was in the hospital for drinking. Came there to quiet his nerves, and he got out, and it says he made a beginning. And I pay attention. People talk about what happened is all of a sudden we're sitting in a roadside cafe, and he's putting an ounce of whiskey in a glass of milk. And we concentrate on that and we talk about the resentment that he had with his boss. But here's what we fail to see. It says his family was reassembled and he went to work for a company he used to own. He might have just come in contact with them to get his wife back and his job back. And Alcoholics Anonymous will give you anything you're looking for. They said it's a vehicle to take me anywhere, provided I'm willing to pay the freight. But each and every time I came and got what I came here for, it was like everything else in my life. Thank you, AA, very much. You've done what you were supposed to do, and now I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And I always come back. There would be times, Glenn, just for the record, since the thought came to mind and I share it. I'd be driving up 34th Street after I picked up every time I picked up the first drink, you know what the first thought that came to my mind was? I'm not going to tell anyone in AA. First thought. Second thought with the second drink is screw those people in AA. I'm throwing out the big book and the 24-hour day book and the meeting schedules out on the road, because there's something inside of me that when I start to get sick again, I'm almost allergic to that which made me well. So I'm sitting at a meeting yesterday, and this is really not full circle, Glenn. I'm just sharing what's in my mind. We're going to continue on with the story, but it's just what's coming out. I'm at the meeting yesterday, and we're talking about spiritual progress. And my sister, who lost a mother 2.5 weeks ago as well, I'm not the only one who lost a mom. I have 2 other siblings and my sister as well. There's 4 of us. She was at a meeting, and she's very Christian. She got sober in AA about 47 years ago, and then got caught up in the rapture and had her service work at church. But every time she came to a meeting with me, there was something here that appealed to her. And she said, I really love that people. I said, Cindy, do you think it's identification? So she came back and she's starting to get involved. But when we were talking about recovery from alcoholism, she started quoting scripture, talking about the Bible and her pastor, and I got offended. And then I know our literature tells me to be quick to see where religious people are right. And what I did was I got short with her. And the first thing apparent is part of the amends that I owe my mother is I've been a bully all my life. I've been a bully to I was the only one in my family. I was only a child, even though there were 4 of us. But I've been a bully. I'm very sharp with my tongue. My sister's very kind, professing to be a Christian and living that life. She's nice. She doesn't treat me the way I treat her. And it bothered me that I got mad and I apologized to her. And I thought, your mom doesn't want you to treat her that way. But I asked, why did it bother me so much? It wasn't the name of Jesus. It wasn't the Bible. What it was is I was like embarrassed for my sister. And I realized that what happened is I let my pride stand in the way of my love for my sister. And that's what I have to be sensitive, Dolly. That's what it's talking about. If I don't continue to seek, if I don't, at the end of the day, review my day to see which direction I'm heading in. What happens is when I get up in the morning, I don't ask God on awakening to direct my thinking. And pretty soon, my 10th step starts to wane. I'm almost taking the steps, if you will, backwards. And anytime I walk in and people need correcting in the meeting, I don't like the topic. I don't know what they're saying. I already know that I'm blocked from God and it's all my problem. I never got that before. I never got that. So I invited her to a meeting today. I was very kind. We went out to breakfast afterwards. And I know, there was, when you come to Alcoholics Anonymous for 4 decades and don't get sober, I meet the description of an alcoholic. When I put a drink inside of me and whatever other chemical seems to go to that part of my brain, I want the next one more than the one in front of me, and I hope they never stop coming. But eventually they have to stop coming because I usually destroy myself physically, emotionally, usually legally. Someone shows up and my sponsor calls it grace when they say, put your hands behind your back. I'm going to get a respite. I'm going to get a reprieve from this disease. It's temporary, but I stopped doing the damage to the host for alcoholism. What AA allows me to do, if I'm willing to do the work, is to get rid of the parasite. But I always thought alcoholism had something to do with drinking, as Dolly told you. We come from Cleveland. And 45 years ago, you'd hear tough guys that would talk, and what they would do is spend 45 minutes talking about drinking. I'm 21 years old. They drank twice as long as I've been on the face of the earth. And I was a uh, fast bloomer. I was only drinking a few months before I totaled out a car, got some crazy charge. I won't bring it up on the record. You know what? I'll bring it up on the record. I was charged with some type of gross sexual imposition, and the charges were dropped because they were unmerited. But behind them was selfishness and alcohol every time. I totaled out a car. Next thing you know, I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous. And what happens is the people would talk about their drinking so much that I thought I hadn't had enough to drink. I didn't think I qualified for AA. And I found out it really doesn't matter how much I drink. If I have that allergy, according to the doctor's definition, I meet the description. I'm a real alcoholic. Whether or not I can stay sober on my own accord tells me whether it helped to the extent that I've lost the power and choice over the first drink. So I came to AA at 21 years old, listened to these stories, but we didn't drink and we went to meetings, and I thought that's what AA was about. Maybe I was a potential alcoholic or found myself in the chapter to the wives as an earmarks of a real alcoholic, but I wasn't there yet. But I will tell you this, that alcoholism is a progressive disease, whether I be drinking or not. I was thinking about this today. My personality became so warped from me trying to satisfy my instincts, like it talks about in the 12 and 12. My drinking and drugging and the way that I lived my life, my personality became so damaged that I couldn't see that the positions I kept finding myself in, I was creating or drawing into myself. If you want to use the word karma, my relationships went downhill. I was hanging out with people that had no value on human life. I dated this one girl, and every time I got a paycheck, she set me up to be robbed. And I would overlook it either because of codependency or loneliness or just wanting to be with someone because I couldn't stand being alone. And she would do it over and over again. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with her? And I never once looked in the mirror to see what was wrong with me. I had gone from a guy who had met a gal who wanted to marry me when I was in my 20s, early 20s. I jumped at the opportunity because her dad was the wealthiest guy in our town. He had developed several cities, and I lived in one of them. And I knew that she worked for her dad, and one day I would be in business with her father. And I set up and made decisions based on self, which put me in a position to be her husband. But I didn't know how to be a husband. See, I never dealt with the infidelity that I had in all the relationships before I was married, like my sponsor, Larry Van Dusen, said. When you're in high school and you fool around behind their back, it's called cheating. When you're married, it's called adultery. It's the same behavior, it just has a different name and a different title, and I never looked at violating spiritual principles which set my life off course. And that's what I did. She made the top of my four-step list. We think it's funny now. She divorced me 6 months before she got her inheritance. Glenn, I put in 8 years for that money. You'd be resentful too. The reason she divorced me, though, is because I acted outside of the marriage because of my infidelity. Do you know what the book says to conclude that I was wrong was as far as most of us ever got? I blamed her for divorcing me. Someone said, why would you do that? I said, well, if she would have stayed at work till 5 o'clock in the afternoon, she'd have never caught me cheating on her at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm not stupid enough to bring someone home if I think I'm going to get caught. That's the way I lived my life. I was always a victim of someone else's wrongdoing. And all that does is keep me steeped in self and blind to myself. Well, I got to the point after coming here for all these years that I was thrown out of an establishment. Might not have been a bar, but you can use your imagination. I don't know how traditional this group is, so I'm going to respect what I believe it to be. I was thrown out of establishment for not sufficient funds. I couldn't come up with one more lie, one more idea, one more scheme to get one more drink. I ended up in a crisis center in St. Petersburg, Florida. And my journey began. I remember being about 10 days sober. And the guy said, I need a favor. And I said, if he needs a quarter to make a phone call, because that's all it was at the turning point. I said, he got the wrong guy. He said, I don't know how to read. And some people said that you have familiarity or experience with this AA. Would you read the big book to me? And I said, yes. And I've been saying yes ever since. Whether my mom passed, I said yes. It was interesting. The 10 minutes before the 10 minutes to 9, 2 Saturdays ago, I got a phone call that my mom passed at 9 o'clock. I had already been scheduled to speak at an AA meeting. The day we had her service, I was scheduled 3 months in advance to speak at an AA meeting. The night we celebrated, so we went to clean out her assisted living. Ironically, the day that we did that, I was scheduled to speak at an AA meeting. I know that God wants me in Alcoholics Anonymous. He wants me with you guys, and he wants me to do the things that I never knew I had to do. A guy told me before I left St. Pete, he said, you might have to stop lying to get honest. That's the message here. If I don't stop lying, I will never be able to grasp and develop a manner of living that demands honesty, let alone rigorous honesty. I added to that, I'm not going to take things that don't belong to me. And all of a sudden, what happened is over time, I started to develop the capacity to be honest. And in about 9 months sober, living at my brother's house, I had lost my driver's license for 6 months. I had 2 new felonies. I lost my mortgage license. All my scorecards read 0, and there was no hope for the future. I'm at my brother's house, and I believe it was like Ralph says, by God's grace, I was surrendered. I discovered this. If I could turn my will and my life over to God, I wouldn't need God. And that's how simple it is for me. I couldn't do it on my own. That's why I think it says at the end of the 3rd step, we had to have God's help. We got to be rid of this selfishness, and it won't go away by itself. And what happened is he surrendered me because I got to look at my life at 9 months and 3 days sober. And I reached the jumping off place. I know where Scott Hammerl was 2 days ago because I've been there. I've been there. The only difference is in God's faithfulness, he gave me a vision of all the miracles that I had seen in Alcoholics Anonymous over the years. And at first I thought maybe it was a joke, like he was letting me see the greatest show on earth and I missed it. But I think he gave me one more opportunity because I quit lying and because I quit stealing, because I quit watching the XXX garbage on the internet. He had my attention where he needed my attention. And what happened is I said, if I can have that, I'll do anything. I remember my 3rd step prayer went like this, Dolly. I said, God, I don't know if you're there. If you're not, I'm doomed. But if you are, I'll do anything. And it's the invitation. That's all he needs is an invitation. That's all he'd been waiting for was an invitation to say, I don't want to do it my way anymore because it's not working. I thought step 3 was about believing in God, getting baptized and joining the church. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with me becoming convinced that my life run by me would never work because it never had. The evidence was overwhelming. I'm from Cleveland. 7 or 8 years ago, our Browns were 0-19, Glenn. They lost 3 preseason games and they blanked the whole season. Larry was a coach. He told me at the time, you know what they're going to do next year? I said, what's that, Larry? He said, they're going to fire the manager. I said, why don't they just hire Tom Brady? He said, the guy who's managing the team has them on an 0-19 losing streak. Who's been managing your life for 60 years? I had to raise my hand. And the only reason it was me managing, or I at least could see that, is because there was no one left in my life to blame. I drank them up. I'm expensive. People don't want me in their life. Usually it's with some type of restraining order, injunction, saying, can you just leave us alone? You exhaust us. There was no one left but for me to look at the condition that I had single-handedly defeated myself. And if I couldn't stop, powerless does not mean less power. It means none at all. If my life had become unmanageable, nowhere in the book and nowhere has anyone in A ever told me that my life ever becomes manageable again. In fact, they said, you're not management material. Fire the manager. I asked God to come into my life. Within a week, I was looking at a 4-step inventory, and I was appalled at what I had become. I don't know why it flowed out this way, but this is the way it come. I figured God was doing the right, and I was holding the pen. The sex inventory came out first, Dolly. I looked at the rancidness of my life. I had gotten a girl pregnant in high school and been on the run ever since. I got a lady pregnant through marriage, and she just made it very difficult for me to see my daughter, and finally I just gave up. You know, the thinking was that God was punishing me for abandoning the first daughter. My concept of God was skewed until I took a fourth step because I looked at God the way I looked at the people I resented, that they were the problem and he was the enemy. And what I discovered is I was the common denominator in every one of those fears, every one of those sexual encounters, and every one of those resentments. Bill Swan was at the center of all of them. And when I could see the truth was that I made decisions based on self in every one of those areas, not considering the consequences to anyone's life or my own, that I put myself in a position where my personality was so warped that even though I was dying of loneliness and trying to draw people in, I repelled them. When God came in that moment and showed me that, and I took a fifth step, it took about 18 hours, 3 6-hour sessions. I'm not special, I'm not important, but I was thorough. I didn't want to drink no more and didn't want to live that way. And I remember saying to my sponsor when I got done with that, I'm ready for step 6 and 7 now. He said, I don't know about that. And I was aghast. I said, I told you everything. Glenn, I told him everything. He said, I don't believe that you left anything out. He said, that may be the most thorough fifth step I've ever heard. He said, but I believe that step 5 is a 3-part step. He says, I believe it says we admitted to God, comma, to ourselves, comma, and to another human being. He said, I bear witness to the fact that you shared it with me and you wrote it and shared it. I think that you share it with yourself. But have you had a conversation with God about you? There's 5 questions they ask us at the end of the 5th step when we take an hour to kind of re-examine. Did we skimp on these proposals? Did we try and make mortar without sand or build a house? The 3 little pigs, I guess, was the story behind it. Did you build a house out of straw, wood, or concrete? Is it going to withstand the storm? Did you keep something to yourself because of that pride that I told you about earlier? Did you withhold something because you were afraid you'd be judged? Or have you deceived yourself again? Are you trying to get the benefits of the 5th step without doing it? And have you tried to hide something from God? And I said no. And I'll tell you what, something in my mind was led to a time when I looked and saw what I became and what I just shared. I was entirely ready for God to change me. Ironically, I had one of that book that I told you I didn't like my sister talking about in the meeting, and I opened up to a chapter 51. The guy was writing some songs. And it was when King David had sex with some guy's wife and got her pregnant and then killed the guy because he wouldn't fall for just total debauchery, just the way I lived. And in that 51st song, he said to God, please withhold not your Holy Spirit from me. Don't take your spirit. I said, God, I don't want to be like this no more. God, I'm not willing that you should have all of me, good and bad, and you adjust my sails. You make me be the servant you need me to be. So back at that 3rd step prayer, where it says, I may bear witness of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life. I'm a testimony. Sometimes I forget that. Like my friend Chrissy told me yesterday, you're an agent, bro. Stay out of your head. When I get into my head, I'm trying to tell you a story, and the story doesn't make sense. When I'm into my spirit, the story makes all the sense in the world because it bears witness to something beyond anything I could describe has gotten a hold of my life and is redirecting it. There were times when I was sober. They used to call me a model AA. So what the hell's that? They said it's a small imitation of the real thing, like a model airplane or a model car. But I would speak at meetings and I did my best. I had no idea that this had to do with relinquishing control of my life to this power. I remember one time when I had about the same time sober now, but not in recovery, but sober nonetheless. I stood up at a meeting, gave my lead, and a lady jumped up because up here in Cleveland, they comment after your leads in person like we do here, I guess. And she said, your mother's a saint. And I kind of paused for a minute, went back in my head. The only thing I said about my mom at the time was I finally official member of AA. I'm 50 years old and I moved in with my mother. She wasn't talking about what I said about my mom. She was talking about my mother. My mother worked side by side with her, and when she burnt her life to the ground through alcoholism, my mother was able to help her get back on her feet in several ways. And she said, for the last 17 years, I've been telling your mother about my progress in AA and all the blessings that have come my way. And she said, your mother's been telling me about her son who's drinking and drugging himself to death in Florida and has had such a struggle with AA. She said, your mother has dedicated her life to praying for that son. And she said, tonight I get to see the evidence of answered prayers. Well, you know the whole story. I didn't stay sober for them, but I gave her hope. I gave her a little bit of peace, a few years of peace. Of course, she was going to let me come home. I was so ugly with self that I thought my own mother would reject me, and all she ever did is love and pray for me. She just wanted me. She deserved a lot better than what she got with me. But I'll tell you what, for the last 30 months, I was at the nursing home every time, 3 times a week, bringing my mom milkshakes, seeing my mom, letting her know that I was sober. My niece and my sister visited her a couple months ago. And my niece said my mom was dissipating physically, not mentally. There was still something there, but she was bedridden or in a wheelchair ridden because of Parkinson's, dementia, and a couple strokes. And my niece said, Graham, anytime you want to go, it's okay, because sometimes you got to give people permission to let go. But sometimes they're not ready. And you know what she told my niece? I'm sticking around to make sure Billy's okay. And my mom left 2.5 weeks ago. I know she knows I'm okay because I'm with you guys and I'm right with God and I'm doing my best to get right with my fellows. That's what this is about. Putting its real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. The goal here is to put our lives in order. I'm so out of order. They used to talk about good orderly direction. I said, how about disorderly direction? I'm a God. And that's what it was. And I couldn't connect the dots. I would get sober and I would get a job. I would buy a motorcycle, try and get a girlfriend. And what I was doing without knowing it was putting some between me and the next first drink. Today, there's nothing between me and the next first drink except my relationship with God. And guess what you guys have promised me? Contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition, I get the daily reprieve. There's nothing that could knock me out of the box if I'm going to continue on 84 through 88, all chapter 7. I sponsor a lot of guys, or about half of them, the ones that let me. I get frustrated sometimes when they lie to me, and then I have to remind myself, what, like you never lied to a sponsor? I've stolen from sponsors. I've lied to sponsors. I've stolen from the AA basket. You know what my nature is, Glenn? I take advantage of people who love me. I've done that all my life. I'm trying not to do that today. I'll give you one story and then you guys can comment. I don't think I have a whole hour in me, Glenn, and that's okay too. Me and David Hollister, was a guy who laid down his life for me. For 30 years. He sponsored me against the better judgment of the Fellowship of AA. They held press conferences together to get me out of his life. One day he paid a $27,900 cash bond to get me out of jail. I said, why do you keep helping me, David? He said, because when I see you, I see myself. And this guy never drank from his first meeting. As a matter of fact, 2 days from now is his 37th anniversary. I was supposed to be taking care of him at the end, and I failed utterly, and the state stepped in, and it kind of compelled me to go up to Cleveland to be with my mom. God's hand, I didn't see it that way at the time. Like Ralph said, grace doesn't always look like grace. But David was active in service, general service, the group level, had the same home group for 30-some years, one sobriety, ate the same sponsor. David, if you open up the dictionary and looked up the word service, his picture would be there. And one night we went to a meeting, and the guy came in halfway through the meeting with these 2 beautiful little boys, matching luggage, 2 Walmart bags with all their belongings. And at the end of the meeting, they asked, does anyone have a burning desire? And the guy raised his hand and introduced himself. He said, I was sober 6 or 7 years. He said, I picked up the first one, and he said, in the last 7 or 9 months, I burned my life to the ground. I have nothing. We have nowhere to go. I need help. Where's David, Mr. Do-Gooder, Mr. Service, Mr. Altruistic, has to go up and talk to this guy. Next thing you know, we got this guy and his 2 little kids in David's pickup truck, and we're going to the Comfort Inn, where David gets him a long weekend special, 4 days. so the guy can put his life together. These kids will be out of the element and they'll have something to eat. The guy who had so much emotion, so much gratitude in him, he couldn't contain himself. He started to cry. He said, if there's anything I could ever do to pay you back. David said, don't worry about it. And I saw the tears in David's eyes. See the gift, people that give are never disappointed. They're always overwhelmed because you can't outgive God. David's gratitude for helping the guy stayed with him longer than that. But when we got in the truck, I said, David, we're not going to that meeting again. He said, why not? I said, that meeting just cost you $300. He said, maybe that's why I have the money and you don't. He said, Bill Swan, you know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. I'm here today. I know the value of a human being. I know the value of a newcomer in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Wait, they come into my home group. Sometimes I ruffle feathers because it's easy sometimes when we rub shoulders and we know each other here even on this two-dimensional platform. And I forget that people are coming in this room that may have 15 days and maybe not planning on staying for 16 days, and they just need a message of hope. Or to know that, guess what, sometimes at 2.5 years sober, when it feels like the weight of the world is I never lost my mom, and my thinking gets flawed, and I think I have no value in AA, why did God keep me alive anyhow? And someone comes along and corrects my thinking. You know how selfishness kills us? I will close with this for real, Glenn. When I get full of self, you look like the problem. And when you look like the problem, I start to judge you. When I start to judge you, I have to look for supporting evidence so I can be right. And one by one, based on my self-centeredness, I drive everyone out of my life. And I sit there talking to God alone. And I know that God hears me, but when I'm alone, for some reason, I become spiritually deaf and I can't hear him. I'm involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. Dolly, you'll be glad to know I am a sober member of AA in good standing. Like my sponsor said, the guy telling the story on this side of this camera today is no longer the guy in the story. I'm not the guy I used to be. I'm not the guy that I'm going to be either. But I'll tell you what, I'm satisfied with who I am in this moment today. Glenn, thanks for having me. I hope that helped. My friend, thank you so much.